The air in the Pacific Northwest hung heavy with an unspoken tension, a primeval breath that stirred the ancient firs and cedars, especially around the forgotten fringes of the Olympic National Forest. Night after night, for as long as anyone in the nearby logging town could remember, a peculiar spectacle disturbed the inky blackness above a solitary, dilapidated farmhouse. Flickering lights, an erratic dance of blue and white, pulsed from deep within the structure's core, casting fleeting, spectral shadows onto the gnarled branches reaching towards it. These were not the steady, reassuring beams of a well-maintained generator, nor the gentle glow of oil lamps. No, these were fractured, frantic bursts, accompanied by a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very earth, swallowed quickly by the vast wilderness. Sometimes a guttural, almost primal sound would escape, a deep groan or a rasping sigh, quickly stifled, as if the house itself was struggling to contain a formidable secret. These strange occurrences were, of course, attributed to the occupant, Elias Vance. He was a man carved from the same stubborn wood as the trees surrounding his remote property, his frame lean and wiry, his face a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and lines etched by years of solitude and untold burdens. Elias was an enigma, a figure of local folklore, rather than neighborhood acquaintance. He lived alone, his only companions the rustling leaves and the distant calls of unseen creatures. For decades, he had purposefully cultivated an image of eccentric reclusiveness, a hermit whose property was a no-go zone, a silent agreement understood by every curious hiker and nosy local. Most people knew him only as the old, weathered man who occasionally ventured into town for supplies, his piercing blue eyes holding a depth that suggested he saw things others couldn't, or perhaps chose not to. Before his self-imposed exile, Elias had been a forest ranger, his tenure marked by an unwavering dedication to the natural world. He possessed an almost uncanny ability to navigate the most treacherous terrains, to read the subtlest signs left by wildlife, and to understand the unspoken language of the forest. This deep, almost spiritual connection to the wilderness was not merely a job, it was the very essence of his being. He knew every trail, every hidden spring, every ancient grove within a 100-mile radius, and the forest, in turn, seemed to whisper its secrets to him alone. This intimate relationship with nature had shaped him, sharpening his instincts and deepening his reverence for life beyond human comprehension. It was this profound respect that had ultimately led him to the farmhouse and its long-held secret. One particularly tempestuous autumn evening, the heavens unleashed their fury upon the Pacific Northwest. A violent thunderstorm, unlike any seen in years, ripped through the ancient forest with merciless abandon. Lightning rent the sky, illuminating the chaos in blinding flashes, followed by thunderclaps that shook the very foundations of the earth. Rain hammered down in sheets, turning dirt roads into raging torrents and transforming the dense woods into an impenetrable, menacing labyrinth. Elias, accustomed to nature's raw power, was nonetheless wary. The storm was relentless, its ferocity threatening to unravel the delicate balance he had painstakingly maintained. Then, with a deafening crack that echoed through the valley, a colossal ancient cedar, weakened by age and ceaseless rain, succumbed to the gale-force winds. It crashed down with the force of a battering ram, narrowly missing the main house but tearing through the adjacent shed, reducing it to kindling. Crucially, its massive trunk gouged a deep trench into the sodden earth directly beside the farmhouse foundation. In the chaotic aftermath, as the storm slowly receded, Elias ventured out, his lantern struggling against the lingering wind and rain. His heart hammered in his chest, a cold dread tightening its grip. The fallen tree had done more than just destroy his shed. It had peeled back layers of meticulously camouflaged earth and rock, revealing something that had been hidden for decades. Beneath the wreckage, where the earth had been violently disturbed, a section of the farmhouse foundation stood exposed. It wasn't just old stone and crumbling mortar. There, partially obscured by debris and the mud-soaked roots of the fallen cedar, was a heavy, reinforced steel hatch, its edges sealed with industrial-grade caulk and bolted into a concrete frame. This was no ordinary cellar entrance. This was a vault, an impenetrable gateway to something deliberately, painstakingly concealed. The storm, in its brutal efficiency, had ripped away the illusion of Elias Vance's ordinary, if reclusive life, laying bare a secret far more astonishing than anyone in the nearby town could have ever imagined. The flickering lights, the strange sounds, Elias's profound isolation, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying realization. He was hiding something, or someone, extraordinary. Before we delve deeper into Elias's extraordinary secret, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of mystery lovers. The devastating downpour had passed, leaving behind a churned landscape and a fresh layer of anxiety for Elias. The storm's aftermath was an immediate threat, not just to his aging farmhouse, but to the carefully constructed veil of secrecy he had maintained for decades. The gaping maw of the damaged basement entrance, now partially exposed to the capricious elements, felt like a spotlight on his most profound vulnerability. He moved with a frantic, almost desperate energy, his weathered hands tracing the jagged edges of a broken beam, the splintered wood, a stark reminder of how close he'd come to complete exposure. The very air around him seemed to hum with the risk of discovery, a palpable tension tightening his chest. Inside, beneath his feet, the subtle rhythmic thumps from the basement felt less like a comfort and more like an impending drumroll. They were usually a sign of life, of a familiar presence, but today, they resonated with a new, unsettling urgency, hinting at agitation. The familiar sounds of movement, usually muted and contained, now seemed louder, almost pushing against the damaged timbers. Elias imagined the creature within, sensing the disruption, the sudden vulnerability of their shared sanctuary. His routine, a meticulously crafted edifice of solitude and vigilance, lay shattered. He had to act, and quickly, before the storm's chaos gave way to human curiosity. Curiosity, after all, was a dangerous predator in these parts. The whispers about Elias Vance and his peculiar seclusion weren't new. They'd always circulated among the scattering of houses down the valley, tales woven from fleeting glimpses and vivid imagination. Old Man Vance, they'd say, was a hermit, a survivalist, maybe even a little mad. They spoke of the shadowy figures some claimed to have seen lumbering near the tree line that fringed his property, creatures too large to be deer, too silent to be bear. Most dismissed them as tricks of the light or exaggerated campfire stories, but a persistent few held on to the notion that something else resided on Elias's land. Now, with the storm's wreckage, those whispers felt closer, more pointed. Adding to Elias's growing unease was the arrival of Deputy Miller, a fresh face in the local sheriff's department, brimming with youthful zeal and an unsettling penchant for observation. Miller wasn't like the old guard, content to let Elias be. He'd started patrolling the area with uncommon frequency, his patrol car a gleaming, unwelcome beacon, on the winding dirt road leading to Elias's isolated farm. Miller had a way of looking, a piercing gaze that seemed to peel back layers, searching for something beneath the surface. He'd even stopped once, offering a polite but probing inquiry about the state of Elias's fence line, his eyes sweeping across the dense foliage that cleverly concealed the more sensitive parts of the property. Elias had dismissed him curtly, but the encounter had left a bitter taste, a premonition of complications to come. Elias's immediate priority was to resecure the basement entrance. He worked tirelessly, ignoring the gnawing ache in his joints and the fatigue that threatened to drag him down. He hauled heavy planks from his shed, his muscles protesting with every lift, his mind racing with possibilities for a quick, temporary fix. The exposed entrance was a gaping wound, and every moment it remained unsealed was an invitation for disaster. He hammered boards into place, not caring about the neatness, only about the security. The sounds of his labor were loud, perhaps too loud, but he hoped they would simply blend into the general cacophony of a storm-damaged property, a man struggling to put his life back together. As he worked, an internal dialogue played out, a quiet attempt to appease whatever stirred below. "Easy now, old friend," he murmured under his breath, his voice raspy from exertion. "Just a little longer. Everything will be all right." He imagined the creature, confused and perhaps scared by the sudden exposure, the unfamiliar chill seeping down into its sanctuary. He knew it could hear him, sense his efforts, and he hoped his unspoken assurances would provide a modicum of comfort. He even paused occasionally, listening for a change in the rhythm of the thumps, a sign that his words, or at least his presence, were having an effect. The thumps did seem to soften, to become less agitated, a small victory in a day filled with overwhelming challenges. He rigged a tarp over the roughly repaired entrance, a temporary shield against prying eyes and the persistent moisture. It looked haphazard, a testament to the urgency of the moment, but it served its purpose. He then started to clear the fallen branches and debris, carefully moving them to create an illusion of undisturbed wilderness around the sensitive area. Every twig, every leaf, was placed with deliberate intent, an effort to erase the storm's violent signature and restore the carefully cultivated camouflage. His goal was to make the property appear as it always had, isolated, unassuming, and utterly unremarkable to anyone not actively seeking to find something amiss. But even as he toiled, reconstructing his defenses, the image of Deputy Miller's patrol car flashed in his mind. The deputy, he felt, wasn't merely curious. He was observant, perhaps even intuitively suspicious. Elias knew that the storm, while a cataclysm for his property, might also serve as a convenient pretext for an official visit. He pictured Miller, notepad in hand, making polite inquiries, his sharp eyes scanning for anything out of place. Elias's heart pounded with a primitive fear. The peace he'd curated for so long, the solitary existence that had allowed his extraordinary secret to flourish, was suddenly incredibly fragile. He couldn't afford a single mistake, a moment of lapsed vigilance. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and orange, casting long, distorted shadows across the ravaged landscape. Elias retreated into the farmhouse, exhausted but far from at ease. He glanced out the window, his gaze sweeping across his property, searching for anomalies, for anything that might hint at his clandestine inhabitant. The wind whispered through the trees, a ceaseless murmur that often brought him comfort. But tonight It sounded like a chorus of whispers, of secrets about to be unveiled. The thumps from the basement were now softer, a gentle, almost meditative rhythm. He offered a silent prayer for continued obscurity, for the blind eye of the world to remain turned away from his extraordinary, decades-long endeavor. The calm might be temporary, a brief respite before the true storm of discovery broke. He had done all he could for now. The rest was up to fate and the unpredictable nature of human curiosity. The rain continued its relentless assault, but Elias barely registered the drumming on the roof. His mind was miles away, decades indeed, lost in the echoing chambers of a memory that had defined his solitary existence. He stood by the flickering, oil-powered lamp in his cluttered living room, the faint glow illuminating dust motes dancing in the heavy air. The scent of damp earth and old wood filled his nostrils, a familiar comfort. Yet today it was laced with a metallic tang of apprehension. He remembered the winter of '73, a season so brutal it seemed to tear the very fabric of the Pacific Northwest wilderness. Snow fell in relentless blankets, trapping wildlife, making even the most seasoned hunters struggle. Elias, then a young, virile forest ranger, had been out on a routine patrol, his breath pluming like smoke, when he stumbled upon the impossible. A small, whimpering bundle, half buried in a drift, its fur matted with ice and blood. It was a juvenile, no bigger than a large human child, but undeniably not human. Its eyes, wide and dark, held a primal fear, a raw intelligence that pierced through the haze of its suffering. A young Sasquatch, separated from its family, injured, and on the brink of death. Elias, a man who had chosen the solitude of the forest over the clamor of human society, precisely because of its unyielding purity, felt an immediate, overwhelming surge of protective instinct. He couldn't leave it. He simply couldn't. The thought of it perishing alone, a magnificent creature reduced to a frozen husk, was unbearable. He carefully, painstakingly, carried the creature, a monumental effort given its surprising weight, back through the treacherous snows to his secluded cabin. That night was a blur of frantic action. He cleaned its wounds, applied herbs he'd learned from local indigenous elders, and wrapped it in warm blankets. The creature, which he later, almost unconsciously, began to call Willow, after the resilient, flexible trees that bent, but rarely broke, was initially terrified. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, a fragile trust began to blossom. Willow, recovering slowly, showed an incredible capacity for mimicry, for understanding, and for a quiet, profound affection. Elias adapted his home, sectioning off a part of his sprawling, unused basement. He reinforced walls, installed a rudimentary ventilation system that led to a discreet vent camouflaged by thick foliage, and created a surprisingly comfortable, if unconventional, sanctuary. It was a monumental undertaking, driven by a deep-seated fear of what would become of Willow if the outside world ever discovered its existence. He saw the avarice, the scientific curiosity, the inherent human need to categorize and control, and he knew Willow would never survive it. The bond that formed between them was unlike anything Elias had ever known. Willow, with its soulful eyes and quiet presence, became the child he never had, the confidant who never judged. They communicated through gestures, through subtle vocalizations, and through an almost telepathic understanding that transcended language. Elias would read aloud from old books, the rhythm of his voice soothing Willow, who would listen intently, occasionally letting out a soft rumble of contentment. He taught Willow about the different plants, the sounds of the forest, the subtle shifts in weather patterns, things he knew Willow already understood, on an instinctive level, but which bonded them further through shared experience. Willow, in turn, taught Elias a deeper patience, a quiet resilience, and an appreciation for the unspoken wisdom of the natural world. The basement became their secret world, a haven from a humanity that would never understand. But the haven was now threatened. The deputy, a new face in the county named Miller, was proving to be far too observant. His patrols, once sporadic, were now a regular, almost hourly occurrence down the lonely dirt road that led to Elias's property. Elias had seen the glint of his binoculars, felt the weight of his speculative gaze. Miller had even stopped by the general store, asking Mrs. Henderson, the town's resident gossip, about that old Vance fella. Elias knew because Mrs. Henderson, unable to resist a good story, had recounted the conversation to him during his infrequent trips for supplies. She mentioned Miller's questions about Elias's reclusive lifestyle, his unusual land, and the strange, fleeting glimpses of a large, dark shape some locals swore they'd seen near Elias's property line. The deputy's investigation wasn't confined to Elias. Minor, almost laughable incidents had begun to plague the small rural community. A farmer swore an entire sack of apples vanished from his porch overnight. A hunter reported his meticulously set traps sprung and empty, with tracks too large and indistinct to be bear or deer. The local bakery, known for leaving out day-old bread for passing wildlife, found its entire stock gone, not scattered by raccoons, but meticulously cleaned out. Each incident, seemingly unconnected, held a whisper of Elias's property. Miller, with a dog-like persistence, was connecting the dots. He wouldn't openly accuse Elias, not yet, but his questions were becoming more pointed, his presence more ominous. The air around Elias's secluded farm, once thick with the tranquil silence of decades, now hummed with an unspoken tension, a prelude to the storm that was gathering on the horizon. The sanctuary, held sacred for so long, was beginning to fray at the edges, and Elias felt the cold tendrils of dread wrapping around his heart. The hum of tension Elias felt had indeed escalated into a full-blown roar. Deputy Miller, a man of relentless if misguided conviction, had crossed the line from persistent questioning to active investigation. His flimsy pretense, a warrant obtained under the guise of alleged animal cruelty or illegal trapping on Elias's property, was merely a legalistic key to unlock the door that Elias had so carefully kept sealed for decades. Elias had seen the deputy's patrol car pull up the long gravel driveway that morning, a sickening lurch in his stomach confirming his worst fears. Miller wasn't alone. A county animal control officer, a nervous young woman who seemed more concerned with avoiding Miller's stern gaze than any perceived animal mistreatment, accompanied him. This formality, this charade, was merely Miller's way of gaining lawful access. Elias knew it, Miller knew it, and the uneasy animal control officer probably suspected it too. Elias met them at the porch, his face a mask of weary resignation. "Deputy," he stated, his voice raspy with age and a burgeoning anxiety, "what brings you to my humble abode this fine morning?" He tried to infuse his tone with a touch of his usual eccentric detachment, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Miller, however, was in no mood for pleasantries. He held up the warrant with a theatrical flourish, its official seal glinting in the morning sun. "Mr. Vance, we have reason to believe there may be animals on your property being held in substandard conditions or possibly illegally trapped. We also have reports of unusual activity. This warrant grants us full access to your property for inspection." His eyes, cold and unwavering, bore into Elias, searching for any flicker of guilt or apprehension. Elias's mind raced, a whirlwind of desperate strategies. He knew he couldn't outright refuse. That would only strengthen Miller's suspicions and likely lead to a far more aggressive, potentially federal intervention. He had to play along, to guide them, to misdirect. Animals? Deputy, you know I've always been a friend to nature. If a stray critter found its way onto my land, I've given it shelter. As for illegal trapping, I haven't set a trap in 50 years. He gestured vaguely towards the vast, overgrown acreage. It's a big property, Deputy. Where exactly do you intend to start this investigation? Miller, anticipating this, pointed to a detailed map he clutched in his hand. We'll start with the main buildings, Mr. Vance. The barn, the sheds, and then we'll move outward. We'll need access to all structures. Elias nodded slowly, his heart sinking. The basement, though well hidden, was attached to the house. He had to divert them to buy time. Of course, Deputy. But you know these old farmhouses. Drafty. I'm just airing out the main living quarters. Perhaps you'd like to begin with the barn. Haven't been in there myself for a while. Might be a nest of something interesting. He offered a weak smile, hoping the suggestion sounded helpful rather than manipulative. It was an old, dilapidated barn, filled with decades of forgotten junk and, crucially, far from the house. Miller considered this, then nodded. Very well. Animal Control Officer Johnson, you take the perimeter of the house, check the windows, look for any signs of unusual habitation. Mr. Vance, you'll accompany me to the barn. Elias felt a fleeting sense of relief. It bought him precious minutes. As they walked towards the barn, Elias deliberately led Miller through the densest patches of bramble and thorn, pointing out old deer trails, making idle commentary about the local flora, anything to prolong the journey and draw Miller's attention away from the house. He even feigned a sudden stumble, dropping his keys, forcing Miller to wait while he painstakingly retrieved them from beneath a thicket. Every second counted. Meanwhile, Willow, deep within the subterranean sanctuary, sensed the shift. The subtle vibrations of the new, footsteps above ground, the unfamiliar voices, the very change in Elias's emotional state, all registered with acute sensitivity. Its internal clock, honed by nature and routine, recognized the disruption. The usual calm, the steady rhythm of Elias's presence, had been replaced by an urgent, almost frantic energy. A low, guttural rumble escaped Willow's chest, a sound born of unease and a primal sense of danger. The ancient timbers of the basement, reinforced over decades, creaked and groaned under its restless movements. Elias, still attempting to distract Miller in the dusty, cobweb-filled barn, felt the subtle tremor beneath his feet. It was faint, almost imperceptible to anyone not attuned to the house's quirks, but Elias knew. Willow was agitated. Its agitation was a palpable force, a reverberation through the very bedrock beneath them. He quickly coughed to cover the sound, feigning an interest in an old rusted plow. Terrible rust, Deputy. Haven't used this in years. Back at the house, Officer Johnson, walking the perimeter, paused. She thought she'd felt something. A faint vibration, like a heavy truck rumbling far in the distance, but it seemed to emanate from directly beneath the house. She looked up at the old structure, then down at the cracked foundation, her brow furrowing. She dismissed it as the house settling, or perhaps a trick of the wind. She continued her methodical search, shining her flashlight into darkened corners, noting the unusually strong locks on certain windows. Inside the basement, Willow's movements grew more pronounced. Its powerful muscled frame shifted, its massive hands occasionally brushing against the rough-hewn walls, sending vibrations through the structure. The air grew heavy, thick with the creature's growing unease. A soft, mournful hoot echoed in the confined space, a sound that spoke of confusion and a profound sense of territorial threat. Elias knew time was running out. Miller, though temporarily diverted by the barn's sprawling disarray, would eventually want to thoroughly inspect the house. The longer Willow's agitation continued, the greater the risk of something truly catastrophic. He had to get them out, or at least away from the basement. He also knew he couldn't put Willow at risk. His years of quiet guardianship, his entire life's devotion to this extraordinary being, were culminating in this terrifying, pivotal moment. The sanctuary was no longer safe. It was a trap. The realization settled heavy in his chest. He needed not just to protect Willow from discovery, but to ensure its ultimate freedom, even if it meant sacrificing his own. This was the terrifying, heart-wrenching truth gnawing at his soul. The humming tension in the air soon became a tangible weight, pressing down on Elias and his fragile secret. Deputy Miller's surveillance escalated beyond mere observation. He had secured a warrant, albeit on a flimsy pretext of animal cruelty, but it was enough to grant him access to pry open the sanctuary Elias had meticulously built. The search intensified, a methodical sweep of the property that felt like a violation of the very earth beneath Elias's feet. Miller, accompanied by a younger, equally zealous officer, poked and prodded, their boots trampling the familiar paths. They found the anomalies almost immediately, subtle to an untrained eye, but glaringly obvious once suspicions were aroused. The unusually large, carefully constructed root cellar, far exceeding the needs of a single man, was the first red flag. Inside, they noted the meticulous organization of preserved foods, but also containers of large, nutrient-rich protein supplements Elias had ordered discreetly through a specialized agricultural supplier, claiming they were for exotic livestock. The reinforced shed, designed to withstand more than just a typical storm, also drew their scrutiny. They questioned Elias about the bizarre network of pipes leading away from the farmhouse, ostensibly for irrigation, but terminating in odd, concealed points further down the slope. Elias, his heart a relentless drumbeat against his ribs, offered vague, evasive answers, feigning the confusion of an elderly recluse unaccustomed to such detailed questioning. He watched from the shadowed doorway of his home as they combed the perimeter, their flashlights cutting through the twilight. Each shadow seemed to conceal a threat, each rustle of leaves a potential betrayal. Miller's eyes, sharp and calculating, kept returning to the ground near the old oak tree, an area Elias had painstakingly disguised, knowing it was dangerously close to the ventilation system for Willow's subterranean dwelling. Elias held his breath, every muscle taut, praying Willow would remain silent, still. The creature, however, sensed the escalating danger. A low, guttural rumble vibrated up through the floorboards, a tremor that Elias felt deep in his bones. It was a frustrated, almost pained sound, Willow's subconscious reaction to the intrusive presence above. Elias managed to cough loudly, dropping a stack of firewood with a resounding clatter, hoping the noise would mask Willow's agitation. The deputy glanced over, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, but dismissed it as an old man's clumsiness. It was a near miss, a moment of pure terror that left Elias trembling, cold sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool evening air. Miller, though still without concrete evidence of an illegal animal, was increasingly convinced that Elias was hiding something far more substantial than a neglected pet. His intuition screamed that this went beyond local ordinances. The sheer scale of hidden infrastructure, The carefully constructed diversions, the old man's almost pathological secrecy, it all pointed to something unprecedented. He subtly altered his daily reports, filtering out the mundane details and highlighting the unsettling inconsistencies. He mentioned Elias's extensive knowledge of local wildlife, almost too extensive, and the unnatural quietness of the surrounding forest whenever he approached the property. He spoke of the strange, unidentifiable tracks he'd glimpsed at the far edges of Elias's land, just beyond the official search boundary. These reports, initially dismissed by regional superiors as the ramblings of an overzealous small-town deputy, slowly began to accumulate, catching the attention of an analyst at a little-known federal agency specializing in unexplained phenomena. The analyst, intrigued by the recurring geographical coordinates and the deputy's consistent, if outlandish, observations, flagged the case. What began as a local curiosity was now slowly, inexorably being drawn into the orbit of a much larger, more clandestine operation. Elias, oblivious to the bureaucratic machinery grinding into motion far above his remote valley, knew only the immediate, suffocating pressure of Miller's presence. He saw the way the deputy's gaze lingered on the hidden nooks of his property, how he meticulously photographed every unusual detail, every patched-up section of fencing, every strangely placed rock. Discovery was no longer a distant threat. It was a hungry beast clawing at his door. He found himself walking through his home, touching the worn furniture, the dusty books, each object imbued with decades of memories, of a life lived in quiet companionship. He felt a profound, aching sadness, knowing this existence, this sanctuary, was crumbling around him. He spent sleepless nights poring over old topographical maps, tracing potential escape routes through the dense, unforgiving wilderness. He knew the land better than anyone. Every hidden ravine, every ancient trail, every seasonal runoff that could provide cover. His mind, sharpened by a lifetime of survival and a singular purpose, raced through scenarios, contingencies, and desperate measures. He knew he couldn't fight the world, not directly, but he could outwit it, at least long enough. The decision crystallized in his mind, painful yet resolute. Willow had to be free, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had built, everything he was. Elias knew he had to plan an escape. The thought of Willow, majestic and wild, trapped and dissected, was a torment he could not bear. He would lose his home, his freedom, perhaps even his life, but Willow would live. That was the only outcome that mattered now. The quiet, unspoken pact they had forged years ago, born of necessity and sealed by affection, now demanded its ultimate price. He would lead his gentle giant back to the wild, whatever the cost. The cold tendrils of dread Elias felt were about to manifest, with brutal, undeniable force. The quiet hum of tension that had enveloped his property for weeks suddenly erupted into a cacophony of approaching danger. It began not with a siren, but with a low, distant thrumming, a sound unfamiliar in the secluded valley, growing steadily louder, like an approaching swarm of giant metallic insects. Elias, standing by his kitchen window, his gnarled hands gripping the chipped porcelain mug, watched with a sinking heart as the first dark shape resolved itself against the morning sky. It was a helicopter, sleek and menacing, its rotors churning the air into a violent vortex directly above his farmhouse. Before he could even process the full implication, two more joined it, flanking the first, their searchlights already piercing the pre-dawn gloom, painting stark, incriminating circles across his fields. This wasn't Deputy Miller's usual patrol. This was something entirely different, something far beyond the local law enforcement's jurisdiction or capabilities. This was a coordinated strike, a military operation. As the helicopters hovered, deafening the valley with their roar, a caravan of dark, armored vehicles simultaneously rumbled into view, kicking up plumes of dust along Elias's long, winding driveway. They moved with chilling precision, forming an impenetrable perimeter around the property. Doors burst open, and figures in dark tactical gear, armed with assault rifles and moving with military efficiency, spilled out, fanning across the land. This was the consequence of Miller's whispered suspicions. The federal authorities he had contacted, now manifesting as a heavily armed, specialized unit. They weren't looking for a reclusive old man or an animal abuser. They were clearly here for something far more significant, something they believed was dangerous and unknown. Elias glanced towards the basement door, a silent communication passing between him and the powerful, unseen presence below. Willow was restless. He could feel it in the vibrations through the floorboards, a low, guttural rumble that spoke of agitation and fear. For decades, he had protected this secret, built an entire life around its concealment. Now, in a matter of minutes, his world was collapsing. A cold, determined resolve settled over him. He had known this day might come, perhaps not in this exact form, but he had lived with the constant shadow of discovery. Now, facing the inevitable, his only priority was Willow. He moved with a surprising agility for a man his age, quickly securing the heavy oak door leading to the main living area, then another, a smaller reinforced iron door that connected to the kitchen pantry. These wouldn't hold against a determined military unit for long, but they would buy precious moments. He then grabbed a worn leather satchel, stuffing it with a few essentials: dried jerky, a compass, and his old hunting knife. He knew his time was running out, but he had a plan, a desperate, final gambit to give Willow a fighting chance. Outside, the raid was in full swing. Commands barked through bullhorns, authoritative voices cutting through the helicopter noise. Elias Vance, this is a federal operation. We have a warrant to search your property. Come out with your hands up. The front door, old and weathered, splintered inward, with a loud crash as the breaching team made entry. Elias ignored them, making his way to the back of the house, towards the hidden, overgrown path that led to the old, disused root cellar. This was his diversion. He threw open the root cellar door, revealing a dark, earthy interior. He then grabbed a can of old, rusty nails and scattered them loudly across the wooden floor, making enough noise to attract attention. Next, he pulled out a small portable radio, tuned it to a staticky channel, and placed it prominently on a shelf, ensuring its faint, distorted chatter would be audible. He wanted to make it seem as though he was hiding, attempting a futile escape through an obvious route, drawing their focus away from the true secret. He took a deep breath, the smell of damp earth and impending confrontation filling his lungs. He was ready to face them, to become the bait, so Willow could be free. The house filled with the heavy thud of tactical boots and the sharp clicks of weapons being readied. Elias heard the shouts of the soldiers as they moved from room to room, their search systematic and relentless. He heard them approach the root cellar, their footsteps heavy on the dusty floorboards above. He stood his ground, waiting. The moment the door was flung open, he emerged, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, his expression one of a weary, defeated old man. "I'm here! Don't shoot!" he called out, his voice raspy but steady. The soldiers, startled by his sudden appearance, immediately converged on him, weapons trained. They shoved him roughly to the ground, securing his hands behind his back with the zip ties. "Where is it, old man?" one of them growled, his face obscured by a tactical mask. "Where's what?" Elias feigned confusion, buying more time. The anomaly. The target, another demanded, kicking at a loose floorboard. Meanwhile, a separate team, following the distinct tremor and subtle structural discrepancies noted by military intelligence, was converging on the old, weathered shed behind the main farmhouse. This shed, seemingly innocuous, had been Elias's clever camouflage for the most critical part of his property. The entrance to the deeper, more secure section of the underground network that led directly to Willow's sanctuary. The deputy's tip about unusual structures and the federal agent's advanced thermal imaging had led them directly to this spot. They deployed specialized breaching tools, tearing through the reinforced wall of the shed. Behind it, a thick metal hatch, disguised with layers of rust and grime to mimic an old, unused access panel, was discovered. It was secured with multiple heavy-duty bolts. The military unit, their faces grim and determined, began to cut through the locks, sparks flying in the dim light. They knew they were close. The floorboards above Elias's head vibrated with a powerful tremor, a deep, resonant rumble that shook the entire house. Willow, following Elias's silent command, was stirring. It knew this was its moment. Its desperation to be free, fueled by Elias's silent instructions and the intense chaos above, was turning into a raw, primal energy. Just as the final bolt gave way with a screech of tortured metal, revealing the dark, yawning maw of the hidden basement entrance, Willow let out a guttural, earth-shaking roar that echoed through the entire valley, a sound that was both a cry of defiance and a declaration of freedom. The ground trembled violently, and Willow, with a surge of primeval strength, prepared to make its desperate break. The guttural roar, primal and resonant, tore through the air, momentarily stunning the highly trained soldiers gathered around the breach. It wasn't the sound of any known animal. It was something ancient, powerful, and utterly terrifying. From the darkness of the newly opened chasm, a colossal, shaggy form erupted. Willow burst forth, a hurricane of brown fur and raw muscle, its immense frame filling the opening, dwarfing the armed men who stood frozen in disbelief. The creature's eyes, burning with a mixture of fear and an untamed ferocity, scanned the bewildered faces before it. Its sheer size and the unexpected speed of its emergence caught the military unit entirely off guard. They had anticipated an anomaly, perhaps a large animal, but nothing prepared them for the living legend that now stood before them, bellowing its defiance. The initial shock quickly gave way to a chaotic flurry of commands and a spray of automatic gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off Willow's incredibly thick hide, doing little more than agitating it further, like tiny, angry insects. The creature lashed out, not with malice, but with a desperate need to escape. A massive arm, thick as a tree trunk, swept through the group of soldiers nearest the basement entrance, sending them sprawling like rag dolls. Their weapons flew from their grasp, their shouts turning into cries of pain and alarm. Willow didn't stop to inflict further damage. Its singular focus was on the dense, concealing forest that lay just beyond the perimeter of Elias's property. Every fiber of its being yearned for the safety of the wild, a yearning amplified by decades of confinement and the sudden, terrifying confrontation with these strange, aggressive humans. Elias, still zip-tied and lying on the ground near the farmhouse, watched the unfolding pandemonium with a grim satisfaction mixed with profound anxiety. The plan was working, but the cost was terrifyingly clear. He saw the targeted gunfire, heard the frantic shouts, and his heart ached, knowing Willow was in extreme danger. Yet there was also a glimmer of hope. Willow was fighting. Willow was escaping. He struggled against his restraints, knowing he had to do more. to ensure nothing thwarted Willow's desperate bid for freedom. As another wave of soldiers converged on the monstrous creature, firing relentlessly, Elias spotted an opportunity. With a superhuman effort born of love and desperation, he managed to wrench his hands free from the poorly secured zip ties, tearing skin in the process. Ignoring the pain, he scrambled to his feet. His movements, though slow and stiff with age, carried a purpose clearer than any of the soldiers understood. He staggered towards a group of military vehicles, parked haphazardly a short distance away, their engines still running, lights flashing. His goal wasn't to escape himself, but to create a diversion so overwhelming that it would force the soldiers to split their focus, to give Willow those precious extra seconds it needed. "Over here, you fools! Leave him be!" Elias screamed, his voice raw, drawing every ounce of attention he could muster. He found a loose rock near a tire and, with surprising force, hurled it at the windshield of the nearest military Humvee, cracking the glass with a loud thwack. Then, with a manic glint in his eye, he fumbled for the fuel cap of another vehicle, trying desperately to yank it open. He knew it was a symbolic gesture, a desperate, futile attempt to cause more chaos. But it was enough. The sudden, unexpected assault from the elderly man, coupled with Willow's continued rampage, created the perfect storm of confusion. A handful of soldiers, momentarily disoriented by the dual threat, turned their attention to Elias. Their faces contorted in a mixture of anger and bewilderment. Who was this old man, and why was he so adamantly interfering? They couldn't comprehend the depth of his sacrifice. As these soldiers moved to reapprehend Elias, Willow seized the moment. With a final, earth-shattering roar that shook the very foundations of the old farmhouse, it surged forward, a primal force of nature unleashed. It breached the outermost perimeter of the military deployment, its massive form crashing through a line of makeshift barricades and disappearing into the dense, forgiving embrace of the forest trees. The sounds of breaking branches and heavy footsteps faded quickly, swallowed by the vast wilderness. Elias watched it go, a profound sense of relief washing over him, dulling the physical pain and the fear of his own imminent capture. Just as the last glimpse of Willow vanished, a powerful blow to the back of his head sent Elias sprawling to the ground. Darkness enveloped him, but not before a small, peaceful smile touched his lips. He was captured, yes, but Willow was free. He had done it. The military personnel, belatedly realizing their true quarry had escaped, were left in a state of utter disarray. Their adrenaline-fueled efficiency had crumbled into bewildered frustration. They had been tasked with capturing an anomaly, an unknown entity, but the reality far surpassed any intelligence briefing. They had faced a creature of myth, a Sasquatch, and it had not only eluded them, but had done so with the assistance of an eccentric old man who seemed to value the creature's freedom more than his own life. The commanding officer, his face grim and sweat-streaked, stared at the point where Willow had disappeared. The public relations nightmare loomed large. How could they explain this? How could they account for the injured personnel, the damaged equipment, and the undeniable fact that a legendary creature had just made a mockery of their advanced capabilities? The initial report of a potentially dangerous anomaly now seemed ridiculously understated. They had stumbled upon a truth that defied conventional understanding, and now they had to deal with the fallout. The forest, once merely a backdrop, now seemed to mock them with its impenetrable silence, holding Willow's secret safe once more. The roar had been unlike anything the military personnel had ever encountered, a sound that penetrated bone and shook their very resolve. In the ensuing chaos, with the ground still vibrating from Willow's emergence, Elias found himself dragged away, a puppet to their strategic retreat. He was led, almost carried, through the forest to a waiting armored vehicle, his eyes fixated on the blur of immense dark fur disappearing into the deeper ancient woods. A profound sense of peace mingled with a sharp, wrenching sorrow settled within him. Willow was free. His decades-long mission, his life's solitary purpose, had been fulfilled. Elias Vance vanished from the public eye as effectively as if he had never existed. He was transferred to a clandestine government facility, a place devoid of windows and natural light, where the days blurred into an indistinguishable cycle of interrogations. The interrogators, sharp-suited and relentlessly persistent, spoke in hushed tones of national security and unknown biological entities. Their complex questions designed to extract information about Willow's origin, its capabilities, and, most crucially, its precise whereabouts. Elias, however, remained an unyielding bulwark. With each question he offered only a worn-out smile or a cryptic, weathered silence. He spoke of Willow as a lost soul, a wild creature he had merely offered temporary sanctuary to, never betraying the depth of their bond, nor hinting at the truly sentient intelligence that lay beneath its primal exterior. He maintained his story of a simple, reclusive old man who had found an injured animal, an orphan of the woods, and merely acted out of compassion. The more they pressed, the more evasive he became, his answers as dense and impenetrable as the forest he loved. Their frustration mounted, palpable in the sterile interrogation room. But Elias held firm. He knew that any detailed description, any hint of Willow's unique attributes, could put it in even greater danger. His silence was Willow's shield. Meanwhile, outside the confines of Elias's detention, the government faced an unprecedented public relations crisis. The brief, terrifying encounter at Elias's farm had left several high-ranking military personnel deeply shaken, and the lingering evidence of massive destruction was impossible to fully conceal. Their initial reports of a unique wildlife encounter were met with cynical disbelief by a public already wary of official narratives. News channels buzzed with speculation. Local journalists, fueled by the deputy's vague but persistent claims of something extraordinary, started digging, their inquiries leading to hushed whispers of cryptids and cover-ups. The military scrambled to control the narrative, issuing carefully worded statements about an unidentified large terrestrial mammal that had been humanely dispersed, while simultaneously launching a vast covert operation to locate and contain Willow. Satellite imagery, thermal drones, and specialized tracking teams scoured the Pacific Northwest. But Willow, utilizing its innate knowledge of the forest and a lifetime of instinct honed by Elias's guidance, proved to be an elusive phantom. The search grids yielded nothing but dense foliage and the vast emptiness of the wilderness. Willow, once a creature of comfort and hidden routine within the confines of Elias's basement, now roamed free, a solitary giant in the ancient woods. The joy of its freedom was undeniable. The scent of pine and damp earth a constant balm. The wind a song it had longed to hear without restriction. Yet a subtle melancholy clung to it, an unseen shadow that followed its immense form through the twilight forests. Elias's absence was a profound ache, a constant dull throb in its massive chest. It often found itself returning, instinctively, to the periphery of Elias's property, now a scene of sterile government investigation, only to retreat into the shadows, a deep sigh rustling through the leaves. The scattered, whispered accounts of an unusually large Sasquatch sighting in the region began to surface. Stories from hikers and hunters, their voices filled with a mixture of awe and terror. They spoke of a creature whose eyes held an unexpected depth, a flicker of intelligence, and an underlying current of profound sadness. It was no longer just a wild beast. It carried the weight of a shared history, a poignant legacy. Elias had been right. The true cost of human discovery, unchecked and driven by fear, was a profound loss. He had sought to protect Willow from a world that would inevitably seek to exploit or destroy what it could not understand. His selfless act resonated through the empty rooms of the facility where he was held, a silent testament to a bond that transcended species, a love that defied logic and law. The mystery of Sasquatch remained, now enhanced by this tale of an unexpected, profound friendship, a testament to the fact that true connection can flourish in the most improbable of circumstances. His choice, his sacrifice, had ensured that the ancient spirit of the forest, embodied in Willow, continued to thrive, untamed and free, a living question mark against the backdrop of human ambition and control. What do you think happened to Elias after that? Share your theories in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from the shadows. Check out our next video for another incredible tale of discovery, where we explore another hidden secret that challenges everything you thought you knew.